People with eating disorders have often been put in a throwaway category. I've had many people say to me, they're all crazy anyway. They're all borderline anyway. How can you not eat? So, you know what? We're just going to send them to a facility and we're going to feed them. They're going to gain weight and we're going to send them out and they're going to relapse anyway.
It's The Journey with drug and alcohol attorney Mark G. Astor.
Welcome to The Journey with Mark Astor. I'm your host, Mark Astor. I've spent a lot of years sitting across the table from people during some of the most challenging moments of their lives. As an attorney, an advocate, and as someone who understands that the road isn't always straight. What I've learned is that success, recovery, and growth rarely look the way we expect them to. There are detours, hard conversations, and moments that change everything. On this podcast, I talk with people who are willing to be honest about their journey, what worked, what didn't, and what they wish they knew sooner. And today I'm very excited because I'm going to get to speak to a friend and colleague and someone I have enormous respect for, Dr. Laura Ellick. Good morning, Dr. Laura. How are you?
Good morning, Mark. It is so nice to speak with you and to see you. It's great that you're doing this. I'm really excited.
So before we get into it, I'm going to tell our viewers just a little bit about you. So Dr. Laura Ellick graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from the College of William and Mary, where she double majored in psychology and Spanish. She then earned her PhD in clinical psychology from St. John's University, is now a licensed psychologist in New York, Florida, and Virginia. She also holds a PsyPact license, which allows her to practice telepsychology and temporary in-person therapy in over 40 states. Dr. Ellick currently works with individuals, couples, and families, both virtually and at her in-person office in Palm Beach County, Florida. Her specialties include eating disorders, addictions, and working with those with chronic medical conditions, including cancer and autoimmune disorders. So she's also done a significant amount of work with college and professional athletes and VIP. While Dr. Ellick is trained in multiple modalities, she tends to focus the use of CBT, DBT skill building, while also pulling from psychodynamic approaches. Her ultimate goal is to assist patients in building resilience and developing strong relationships with others. Tackling mindset and challenging early childhood programming while building upon core values and identity is also important in her work with her patients. Wow, that's a pretty impressive background. I don't think I was as well educated as that. I think I just about got through school. Somehow I got through. But I'm glad you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
So
you.
I always like to know a little bit about my guests, and I don't think we've even talked about this. So this will be my first time going back in time with you. But Dr. Lord, tell us about where you grew up and what really got you into doing this kind of work.
You know, it's so funny. I had such a basic childhood. I grew up in the suburbs of Long Island, that free range time where we were just kicked out of the house and we were riding bikes all over the place. It really was a great time to grow up. I was very attracted as a child to true stories of people who were in tremendous amounts of pain. I have no idea why I loved it. I loved the afternoon specials where they used to talk about kids who were homeless or kids who were orphaned, or those were the TV shows I used to watch, the books I used to watch. I originally wanted to be a teacher, then somehow, somewhere along the way, switched to social worker. And then when I got to college, my idea was I was going to study the thing that didn't feel like work, because I had been told if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And so psychology, that was the topic. I was reading, what's the next class I can take? What more can I learn about? It just hit it for me. It just hit the nail on the head. That's where I decided to focus all of my studies.
Okay. Was there any history in your family? And maybe I'm prying too much. I apologize if
No,
I am.
of course.
Because I
No history in my family of addiction. There is, now that we're looking at it, probably some history in extended family members, but nobody in my immediate family that grew up with any addiction. When I was in college, I started looking for volunteer opportunities to build a resume so that I could apply to graduate school. And I received a grant from my college to work at a day program on Long Island, basically taking attendance and sitting in groups. And it was for what they used to call back then MICA, the mentally ill, chemical abused. We don't use that term now, so it's hard for me to remember. We call them dual diagnosis now. But I found the people who had addictions to be funny as hell, and really had a way of just putting it out there and telling the truth. And then we find out later on that they weren't necessarily telling the truth. And it just sort of gave me a different view of what I could actually do in this field. Up until then, I just figured I would be working with people who are depressed, or maybe in the mental hospitals working with schizophrenia. That's where a lot of my experience was in graduate school. And so this just opened up a whole new world. And I like complicated things. And I found addiction and eating disorders to be so complicated. It's not one size fits all. There are certain behaviors that are similar among people. But man, to get inside someone's brain when they are struggling with an addiction or an eating disorder, and I was like, I'm there.
I want to know something. How did you go to choose a double major in psychology and Spanish? Like, how do those two things go together?
So I loved it. I took Spanish. I wanted to speak Spanish from very early on because my older brother took it. So I took Spanish since probably eighth grade. And I studied actually languages in college as well. So I did French, Spanish, and Brazilian Portuguese. So I really was torn at the end of the day. Like, if I didn't get into graduate school, would I become a translator, or would I do something like that? So at the end, it was coming down to the wire of where I was going to get into school. And one of my professors said, if you want to go to graduate school in Spanish, I can get you into the University of New Mexico right now. Cut all the anxiety, cut everything, go and do Spanish. And I waited it out and I got into school. But I figured it was much easier for me to study Spanish on my own on the outside and work with the Spanish speaking population than to try to become a psychologist on the side. You just can't do it. So it was just kind of like a practical decision, but I love travel. I tell people that I grew up in a very fear-based family. My family all knows that. And so I run towards challenges. So if my family was like, don't go visit Mexico, I'd be like, I'm going to visit Mexico. Or I went to Ecuador in 2015 to volunteer in a neurological clinic, and my parents were nervous as anything. I'm like, I'm going to go do that, because everything that you do builds you. And so I want to be able to, when I talk to my patients, I want to be able to say, do the hard things. I've done some hard things, so I know exactly what doing hard really means. Wasn't easy. I was anxious, but I did it.
Okay. When it comes to working with people who have behavioral health issues, how did you choose clinical psychology? Because it's a bit like the legal question. They're all different disciplines in the behavioral health space. So how did you choose that?
So I knew I wanted to work with patients. And this is something that's actually really interesting, Mark, is at the time, we didn't have too much guidance. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have people that we could really ask. I don't know if you guys have people like advisors in law school who help guide you to what kind of law you want to practice. We didn't really have that. So I kind of was trying to figure it out on my own. I knew I didn't want to be a researcher. So I knew I wanted to treat people. So clinical psychology seemed to be the way to go. And it was funny because it was so competitive. I think it is still competitive, that one of our graduate professor, our advisor, was even advising people and advised me, do the master's degree. You'll never get into a PhD. And you just don't say that to someone, right? You'll never get in. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get in. I'm going to get in, and I'm going to tell you that I got in, and I'm going to do it. So I knew treating people was for me. I like data, but I don't like doing research.
Okay. I know that your specialty is eating disorders and addiction. Before I talk to you about that, I want to ask you if you've seen a change in the kinds of cases you get. And the reason I ask you that is because when I first started doing this work in 2016, most of the patients, the families that we were working with, had somebody in the family who really had an issue with a substance use disorder. And I was just trying to get just trying to get Marchman Act cases. And then two things really changed that: COVID and the legalization of marijuana. And we saw this massive shift. And I would say that the bulk of our cases now are primary mental illness. There may be some substance use, there typically is, but a lot of it's driven by this new legalized marijuana. And I wanted to know from your perspective if you've been affected by that. Have you seen that shift in the kinds of cases you're getting?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. The kinds of cases that I'm getting right now are way more severe, higher acuity, people who have gone without treatment for a longer period of time, and maybe due to COVID, due to the lockdown, due to not knowing where to find resources. There are a lot of psychiatrists who are so booked out that you can't even get in to see someone for a couple of months. So even people who want treatment are having a hard time finding it. So I have also seen an increase in co-occurring disorders. So particularly addiction and eating disorders together, which I'm going to be talking about this summer at the Veritas event. Just the number of eating disorder clients who have co-occurring substance use and vice versa. And is it that we're just identifying it now? Have they gone underground for all of these years? No, I think what's happened is people's coping skills are completely taxed. And if one doesn't work, they're going to try the other and they're going to flip flop.
All right. I want you to talk about, and maybe you can help us define what an eating disorder is, because we get those cases, and my experience is that they are very challenging clinically. And so maybe let's talk about that, because I know that's one of your areas of specialty, and there's not a lot of clinicians who want to take those challenging cases for a myriad of reasons that we're not going to discuss today. But maybe define for us, what is an eating disorder?
So, an eating disorder is a dysfunctional behavior, attitude, emotions towards food, eating, body shape, weight. And the way I define it for people is when it becomes problematic is like any other disorder when it interferes with your daily living. So very much like a substance use, there are people who are recreational users. There are people who can diet and lose 5 pounds and never have a problem, never develop anything else. And then there are those people who they lose 5 pounds and it triggers something in them that they just can't stop. And so we're going to be talking about, similarities in the brain functioning, because we now know that substance use and eating disorders are very much brain disorders. But when we're looking at eating disorders, even the number of eating disorders we've identified has grown. So we're now looking at anorexia, which is primarily restrictive behavior, bulimia, which is engaging in binge eating, which is defined as eating a number of calories, substantial number of calories, way more than any other person could eat in one sitting, not caring how full you are, not caring what exactly the food is, and then doing anything that you can to get rid of that food by vomiting, by compulsive exercise, by use of laxatives. And then we have binge eating disorder, which is the binge eating piece without the compensatory behavior. And then we have a new one, a fairly new one called ARFID, which is avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder. And these are the individuals who for many, many years were just called picky eaters. And there are some people who are just picky eaters, but we see this co-occurrence usually with ADHD, OCD, and autism spectrum disorder. And this pickiness, it's usually related to sensory issues, smells, tastes, textures of foods. And these are kids who never hit the growth chart, they're malnourished, they're underweight, and they may eat 5 foods. Chicken nuggets, French fries, ketchup, which is considered a food group for many people, no vegetables, no nothing. And then we're seeing like the mixed bag of all these other different kinds of disorders. So I've seen a huge increase in the number of ARFID clients. And I think that's just because of better diagnosis.
Okay. So when it comes to treating somebody like that, because here's from my perspective, one of the things that I noticed in some of these cases, I had a family recently, and this was the second time I think in 2 years I'd spoken to them. And one of their concerns was when we put her, and I'm going to talk about the difference between men and women in a second, but if we bring her into court, she will present well.
Mhm.
She's going to look fine. And the judge will say, she looks fine to me. There's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with her. So are there certain things that families can look for? Because I've noticed, especially alcoholics are a great example, right? They're really great at hiding things, right? And once the family figures out what's going on, they find empty alcohol containers all over the house. I mean, anywhere you could stash them, the car, the house, the laundry room, the closet, they're empty. They do everything they can to hide it. So are there certain things that families may be missing they might say, oh, hold on a second, I think there's an eating disorder here. Like, what are the signs?
Absolutely. With anorexia, it's a little bit harder to hide because of the significant weight loss. However, kids do a very good job, adolescents do a very good job because baggy clothes are very in, right? They'll wear American Eagle sweatshirts, they layer up, they wear the sweatpants. Oftentimes, I've had parents say to me, I had no idea that my daughter, I knew she had lost a few pounds, but I had no idea how bad it was until I walked in on her in the bathroom and saw her bones sticking out. So that's one of the tricks that people who are anorexic may do. The other one is they're always eating someplace else except at home. Oh, my friends and I stopped off at Chick-fil-A on the way home from school. Or, oh, we had a party at school and I ate there. So the parents are believing that their child ate and never really knowing how to follow up. With bulimia, what we will often see is, believe it or not, if the families do a room search or a car search, they may find bags of vomit hidden all over the place. So the individual may be stuck in the bedroom, can't sneak out to the bathroom. So they throw up in whatever they have and hide it and then try to get it out of the house. Or what the families may notice is all of a sudden the hall bathroom, that toilet seems to be clogging an awful lot. Or all of a sudden we have a problem with the shower. We've never had the shower clogged before. Now all of a sudden we're getting clogs in the shower. They may see that their daughter has calluses or red marks on their fingers. That comes from putting your fingers down your throat to vomit. So there are some signs that you can look for. You will often see someone who is vomiting will get what's called chipmunk cheeks. The salivary glands tend to swell. So whenever I have a family where they are speculating that there might be an eating disorder, I will tell them to look for these particular signs and to take the daughter to the doctor as soon as possible and have the blood work run and have the EKG done, because that'll tell you. Blood work doesn't always tell you, but if someone is throwing up, the electrolytes should be off. We should be seeing some physical signs that the body is not doing well.
Okay. One of the challenges that we see when we speak to families, Dr. Laura, is the denial. She'll get over this. She'll get past this. And you and I both know from experience that this is a disease of the mind. And unless it is treated, it will get worse and it can and will destroy the person. What are your feelings about that for families that are watching this and they just can't come to grips with it? How do we address that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is where there's such a similarity with the substance use population, right? The family dynamics have a tendency to be very similar, right? There's often chaos in the families, particularly if you have a family that is struggling with bulimia. We do see an overlap in terms of family chaos, generally alcoholism, drug addiction in the family. So there's a lot of denial and secrecy. And bulimia by itself is a disorder that is cloaked in shame. A lot of the families and the individuals feel shame and guilt about what they are doing, that it seems, and I'm using air quotes here, seems disgusting to hide bags of vomit around the house. It's just part of the disorder. What usually brings it home to families is when I tell a family, on average, it takes 7 years to recover from an eating disorder. And any day that you are delaying treatment, you're just extending that 7-year period of time. The other thing that scares families when I tell them this is your child may look fine right now, but one of the things that we know about eating disorders is someone could look fine on the surface and pass away 2 hours from now. So when I worked in the residential facilities, we would admit someone in the morning who by all intents and purposes, they looked fine. Their vitals seemed to be stable. By the end of the day, we were sending them to inpatient treatment because their EKG had gone off. Their blood pressure dropped. They passed out. So this is where I feel that your part really can come into it. I've become a very big fan of the use of intervention work to help these families get their loved one into treatment, so you can do a significant amount of work with the family as well.
Okay, so what does treatment look like? Because one of the things that I've noticed is there's not nearly as much treatment for eating disorders as there are for other types of behavioral health issues.
Not that much good treatment for eating disorders. And I will tell you why. This is a systemic issue. There is no money in eating disorders. I just got to put it out there. Insurance companies fight over who the eating disorder belongs to. Is it a psychiatric illness, which we know in this country not a lot of money is devoted to psychiatric illnesses, or is it a medical illness? And so the insurance companies fight back and forth over who actually covers this disorder anyway. It is incredibly expensive to remove someone from the house, right? Put them in a home setting, much like you might do with residential treatment for addiction, feed them, et cetera, et cetera. Bless you.
Thank you.
Insurance companies seem to be much more likely to do that for addiction than for eating disorders. And I'm not 100% sure why, because the relapse rates for both are pretty bad. People with eating disorders have often been put in a throwaway category. And I'm just saying that based on my experience. I don't have any statistics on it, but I've had many people say to me, they're all crazy anyway. They're all borderline anyway. How can you not eat? So, you know what? We're just going to send them to a facility and we're going to feed them. They're going to gain weight and we're going to send them out and they're going to relapse anyway.
I don't know if
It's
it's maybe because one of the dynamics we've dealt with over the years is it's a conscious decision. So if they decided not to eat, they can decide to start eating or whatever the behavior is. And I'm wondering if the insurance companies are saying this is just somebody who doesn't eat enough, or okay, so they throw up. So it's not like somebody who's schizophrenic or they've got paranoids and they're paranoid and delusional, right? And maybe it's just because somebody who's clearly paranoid and delusional, you can see it, right?
yes.
You can literally see it. Whereas the eating disorder, maybe they present well, but you don't see what's going on behind the curtains. And so maybe that's the problem. I don't know. You're the clinician. And
But
I'm just wondering if that's what
I
it
think that
is.
has a lot to do with it because listen, let's look at the typical anorexic. The typical anorexic is a perfectionist, an A student, wants to look all put together, likely has OCD or some obsessive compulsive disorder. They're the ones who are going to look like they're so wonderful. Inside, we've seen 14-year-old girls who have the bones of an 80-something-year-old woman. The insurance company is not seeing that. It's only very recently that we've actually made it pretty standard for these girls to get bone density exams when they go to treatment. Because what do we want to do? We want to stave off osteoporosis. These girls have osteoporosis now at age 14. So we have to intervene very quickly. And I think, yes, I think there's a lot of education that's needed because there is paranoia that goes on in these disorders. You just don't see it. So, for example, I will have girls who will panic because you give them a bottle of water and it says on the bottle 0 calories. And they will say, well, I'm not sure it really is 0 calories. How do we know that the person who was doing the calorie count on the water didn't just change it? I've heard that, right?
Okay.
Blows your
That's
mind.
It does. I've never heard that before because doesn't everybody know that there's no calories in water, right? It's the one thing you can drink and drink. There's no
Right.
calories in it. Now, if you keep drinking too much of it, it can obviously can flush all the minerals out of you, and that causes another problem. But wow, okay, all right. Let's switch gears a second. What are your thoughts, if you have any, on GLP-1 and some of those medications for weight loss? What do you think about that?
That is such a tricky problem. I am going to say something that does not fit in with the everybody at every size movement that we have right now, which I do believe that, if you are healthy and you are comfortable in the size of your body, fine. But there are a lot of people who aren't. And we also know that the co occurring disorders that go along with being significantly overweight, heart disease, diabetes, not only are these just medications that cause temporary discomfort. I had a relative who lost several toes and part of her leg because of diabetes that she didn't take care of. So it's a serious illness. So if we're looking at a substance that can help reduce the probability that people will lose their life early due to being overweight, I'm all for it. I'm very interested in the data that's coming out right now showing the reduction in addictive noise, in substance use, as well as in some of the binge eating. That, there's that repetitive thought process. I need a drink, I need a drink, I need a drink, or I need to binge, I need to binge, I need to binge, where someone can't get that thought out of their head. And the GLP-1 seemed to quiet that chatter. So I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I did a couple of videos on just that, those
Mhm.
issues. There is evidence that the GLP-1 could be really helpful for addictive behaviors. I think that right now they're looking at alcohol. I also saw something online about cocaine use. It's got all kinds of interesting potential applications. And I'm like you, I've got a good friend of mine. He has been morbidly obese for years. And he
Mhm.
goes to the gym and he's been on every kooky, wacky diet that there is
Mhm.
known to man. And he couldn't lose the weight. Or if he did, he started running marathons. And so it was a temporary weight loss. As soon as he stopped running,
Mhm.
because his knees got sore, he gained the weight. And he's been on GLP-1, I think, for about 7, 8 months. And he's lost a significant amount of weight. And he's already gone through a procedure on his heart, and
Mhm.
there's a family history of heart disease because of the morbidly obese weight issue. So
Mhm.
I'm with you, right? If we can help somebody to lose weight because there are other factors. I mean, I know as men, right? Visceral fat around the belly is not good for us. And as I'm going to be 60 in January, and as I've gotten older, it's become harder I look at my wonderful, amazing, handsome stepson walking around with shoulders that are twice as wide as mine and a little tiny waist. And I'm like, where did all the years go? I mean, I never looked like him, but there was a time in college where 50 pounds ago, I had a little tiny waist. And
Mhm.
I didn't even think about what I ate. I was hungry, so I just ate
Mhm.
pizza, whatever it was. And
Right.
so it does get harder as you get older. And as you get older, obviously things like being overweight and heart disease all become factors. So I'm with you. If we can help people, we should. Obviously, if it causes other side effects, that's not a good thing, but everything
Well,
has
listen,
an effect at some point.
the side effects of the GLP-1 seem to me to be much less than the side effects of the people who I know, because I used to work for a bariatric surgery program, for the people who have gone through bariatric surgery, the lap band, the gastric sleeve. You want side effects? There are some side effects. Certain foods that you can't ever eat again. You have to chew your food really, really small or it will come up. It is a very disruptive procedure. So having something that people can use that is fairly easy, I'm all for it. If it reduces healthcare costs also, why shouldn't the insurance companies be on it? But we know that they don't like to pay for anything. It's going to be a little bit of a battle. The challenge I see is when it goes into the mainstream media, as we've seen, and there are people in Hollywood, let's say, who are already tiny, who are now using it in unhealthy ways to fuel their eating disorder.
Okay. Another question for you. Social media. Do you think that social media has played a role in some of these, in a lot of the eating disorders? We see, look, let me back up for a second. I did a video about 2 months ago about the fact that 99.9% of the eating disorder cases we see are women. But when it comes to men, it's not so much that they're not eating enough or they're binging and purging and all that stuff. The condition I read about and I did a video was called bigorexia, right?
Mhm.
Men, we're never big enough. We're never muscular enough. And so you have kids who are in their early 20s and who are taking all kinds of testosterone and other types of steroid
Mhm.
because they want to be bigger. And the bigger they get, they're never big enough, right? So those are the kinds of cases we see. But I think a lot of that is, even with the men and definitely with the women, we got this sort of idea of what's ideal. This is
Right.
what a man should look like, right? This is what a woman should look like. And I'm wondering if some of the issues that we're seeing are because of what we see on social media, the perfect body, right? 90%
Mhm.
of it is manipulated, and half these people are on God only knows what to make them look like that big or that lean or whatever it was. What do you think about that? Is social media cause some of this, do you think?
That's a tricky one because if I say it's not social media, people will scream at me and cancel me and shut me down. Yes, I think social media plays a part in it. I think the fact that people have it so accessible, like I think when I was young, we had Cosmo magazine, we had Glamour, we had all of those magazines that were basically doing the same thing. All of the models were in the magazine. I remember reading Glamour magazine and being like, oh, I should look like that. And I just didn't. I was never going to be like 5'9" or anything like that. And that, I think, yes, I think anything that we have that is targeting a particular population has the ability to be used in an inappropriate way. I think what we need to be doing is speaking to our children from very early on and talking to them about what they're actually seeing on social media. A lot of it is AI. I'll watch a really cool video and I'll be like, "Oh, I wonder who this person is." And then it's like created by AI.
It's
And
not
I'm
even
like,
real.
it's not even real. And so I think talking to your kids before you even allow them to be exposed to social media, having the difficult conversations, talking to them about what it actually means if you see this person and this person on social media, they seem to have a very perfect life. But you and I know, because we've worked with those people, behind the scenes, their lives are not perfect. They're doing
Yeah.
lots of things themselves to try to manage. So, yes, I believe there's a part of it. However, that would mean that every single person who watches social media would get an eating disorder, and that's not true. And so I think what we have to look at is what are the mediating factors or what are the protective factors? I think bullying is huge. People who are bullied for their weight, their height, their appearance, those are the people who are going to look on social media and feel worse about themselves. People who are not part of a traditional group, who don't have friends or family who can build them up, who don't have a strong identity, which is a lot of 12 to 16-year-old girls. I think, like anything else, social media has to be used appropriately. I mean, I look at it, I happen to love TikTok. I look at it and I'm like, this is funny and it's so fake. But I don't know if a 12-year-old has the ability to do that. And so we may need to limit it until they have the prefrontal cortex to evaluate.
Yeah, the other night, my wife and I were lying in bed and we were watching a rerun of Cheers, which was probably, at least of the 80s, my favorite sitcom. And Kirstie Alley was on Cheers, and she was a very attractive, woman. And I remember seeing an interview with her years after she got done when she was significantly heavier. And she talked about that. She literally starved herself so that she could stay at that weight because she knew that if she gained weight, then she'd probably be written out of the show. And
Mhm.
even back in the 80s, we were seeing that. And I think I saw an interview once with one of the ladies that was on Baywatch. Again, she literally starved herself so she could fit in that red bathing suit.
They starve
Otherwise, she would have been
themselves
written
and
out of the
use
show.
cocaine. Cocaine was the other one that they used in the 80s to keep themselves thin. So the pressure was definitely there. Have we moved a little bit more in the direction of body acceptance? I don't know. I think the eating disorder organizations have done a really good job of trying to spread that word. I don't know that it's really gotten out. You're fighting against a long cultural standard.
And I'm wondering if the pendulum has shifted because I saw an article about Adele, an amazing recording artist, and she lost a boatload of weight. And all these people were like all over her. Oh, we liked you before when you were morbidly obese and way too heavy. Now you lost the weight. By the way, because she was having health issues, and now they're shaming her.
Exactly. Same with Lizzo, with a lot of the people who, I think they're also pressured. When they were in larger bodies, they were, I love my larger body. Lizzo was like, I love who I am. So are they succumbing to the pressure to get smaller or are they having health issues? It's really none of our business, right? But now that they are in smaller bodies, now you see the media turn on them. That's,
And
you
maybe
can't.
they did. And maybe they didn't like their large bodies, and just like my friend, just couldn't figure out a way to get it off and keep it off.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, something like a GLP-1 came along, and they're taking an injection once a week, and they're like, "Wow, I'm losing weight. I feel better about myself. My knees don't hurt. My back doesn't hurt. I
Mhm.
feel more comfortable. It's easier to go to sleep at night." Interesting
Yes.
stuff.
Mhm.
Okay, one of the things I know and I read about in your bio was that you work with professional athletes and celebrities. Can you share a little bit about what that work? Obviously, I know you can't mention individuals, but tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, tough population.
But
Very
because
tough.
right? Because and in our office we've put a couple of professional athletes in treatment, and you always look at professional athletes and you say, wow, they make all this money, they live this perfect life, they're getting paid millions of dollars to throw a ball or hit a ball or whatever it is. What the hell do they have to complain about? What's their problem? But yet, they're not immune either.
That's the biggest stereotype actually is, hey, just dump millions of dollars on me and I would be fine. Look at Britney Spears. She's not fine. She grew up in not privilege, but she made it for herself, right? And we know that she's not happy. Nobody is immune, and nobody knows what goes on in somebody's inside or back door or whatever. One of the things I really enjoy about working with athletes is they have an incredibly determined mindset. And VIPs and high net worth executives, they have a great mindset. They're determined. The thing that I don't like about working with those populations is that they have a great mindset and they're determined, which means they really don't want to hear anything that the professional has to say because they think they oftentimes know it or don't think it's going to work, or I've been doing it this way my entire life, or, why should I change? Why should I do it a little bit different? But if what you're doing is not working for you, meaning your family is falling apart, you've had your third DWI, your kids won't talk to you, then maybe we do have to do something different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got a call from a colleague about 2 weeks ago who was working with a professional athlete who was about to sign a, an eight or nine figure contract to play professional sports, and the guy was suicidal. And I said to my colleague, I said, you got to get him into treatment. Once the team finds out, they're going to cut him, and the gravy train is over. You got to get him into treatment. It's the off season. Now is the time to do it. I'll refer to a treatment center that really specializes in working with that caliber of client, those professional athletes. I said, otherwise, first of all, there's a risk he might actually harm himself. I
Mhm.
said, but second of all, when the team finds out, and it will, at some point, he will have that break, and then it
Mhm.
will become obvious, and you don't get him into treatment. I said, it's over. But a lot of the problem is with some of these professional athletes is that they have the entourage that yeses them to death,
Mhm.
literally. Yes, and is afraid to tell the individual, this is a problem, you got to address it. And so somebody like you comes along and says, look, if the behavior doesn't change, the gravy train's over, your life's going to disintegrate, and they don't
Mhm.
want to hear it. I think that's part of
No,
the problem too.
exactly. And they don't want to hear the possibility of medication as well. I could, because these are the people who I can do it myself. I was a businessman. I came from a family poverty. I raised myself to be this. I do everything myself. I'm not going to take any medication. So it's those things that really make it very difficult. But I want to disabuse people of the notion that, again, this is a social media fallacy that all of these people have perfect lives. They do not. They just have better social media people who post happier things.
Um, one of the things I noticed also, I've been watching some of this talk with Robert Kennedy, who's, he's been talking about getting rid of all the dyes out of the foods because it causes problems. And one thing I noticed in particular was this whole idea of the food pyramid, right?
Mm,
That it's really upside down. We've been telling, people eat carbs, eat this, eat that. And there's some evidence, and I think it's connected to the whole GLP-1 thing in diabetes, that we're eating the wrong foods, that we should be eating animal proteins and saturated fats. And listen, between my wife and I, we have 6 doctors in the family. If I sit down and talk to my father-in-law, who I love dearly, who's a retired pediatrician, and tell him, you know what you need? You need a good steak. Oh, the cholesterol? Are you kidding me? I'm not.
mhm,
But now there's evidence that we actually are built to eat animal proteins and saturated fats, not refined carbs, not sugars, not any of that stuff. And yet some of those things, and I've been reading about this, some of those refined type carbohydrates can have an effect and can contribute towards mental health issues, behavioral health issues. What are
mhm.
your thoughts on some of that stuff, Dr. Laura?
There have been some indications about how much sugar someone with ADHD should have. Those kinds of stories have gone around for ages. But as you get older, your need for protein really increases to maintain your muscle mass. So my doctor is actually on me to eat more protein, more meat, more chicken, because it's much, much harder to build protein as you get older. And we also need the protein to help put the stress on our bones to prevent osteoporosis. So maybe we should be doing that from younger. The thing with carbs is it's a quick source of energy, but doesn't last for long. And it's not great for your blood sugar to go up and go down all the time either. So I'd be really interested. I'm not a dietitian, but I'd be really interested to see what comes out of this. I wouldn't necessarily say you need to eat a steak every day, but I don't think most people get enough protein in their diet. And drinking the protein shakes is not the same.
Yeah, I mean, look, I try to eat real foods. I've gone from eating multiple little meals to like two big meals. And I did some research, and one of the things they were saying was if you have a solid brunch and then a solid dinner, but you don't snack in between, in other words, you don't have those little meals, what it does is it stops all those insulin spikes, because every time you eat, spike, right? And that in and of itself is not a good thing. Whereas if you have for me, when we break at noon, I'm gonna have eggs, and I probably will add a shake, but I'll have other types of proteins, and I won't eat again I won't snack until dinner. And what I learned was that what that does is it causes a steady release of aminos into the bloodstream, which is much healthier than we keep
Right.
spiking, right? Because the spikes start to shut down things like growth hormone, which is what you need for
Mhm.
recovery. So when I go to the gym in the morning, if I'm constantly spiking my insulin, it can hinder my body's ability to recover. So
Absolutely.
one of the things I've been doing for a long time is I've been an intermittent faster. I've been doing that for a long time. I found just as I got older, I couldn't eat as much food. It helps me to keep the weight off. And frankly, I don't have that crash by not eating all those little meals right after I don't get out of the gym and have a protein shake.
Mhm.
It stops the body from shutting down all the recovery process. They tend to recover
Mhm.
better.
Mhm.
So just wanted to share that with you. But I know you've written a couple of books. Will you tell us about those? What you've written? How we get them?
So the books that I wrote one long time ago called Total Wellness for Mommies, and it was about the physical, emotional, spiritual aspect of how you put everything in balance when you're a mom. I don't even know if that one's in print anymore. Then I did a book chapter that was about narcissists and gaslighting, which was a really hot topic until the culture co-opted it, and now everybody is apparently a narcissist, and so the term means absolutely nothing anymore. And then I did more of a spiritual book, and this was during COVID, when I thought people needed something a little bit more inspirational, and that's a journal book. So on one side is a more of like an inspirational quote, and then on the other side is just a blank page for you to kind of reflect on it. And that to me was a way to put something out during COVID to help people who didn't have someone to talk to or weren't in a supportive environment. At least they could try to journal about their feelings. And that one still is on Amazon. And there is a book in my future, which I'll probably talk about at the Veritas event. It's going to be a big one if I decide to take it on. A lot of information.
I love that. And I know you have a podcast too.
I do, from Mayhem to Mindset with Dr. Laura, which is so funny. When you were announcing doing your little blurb at the beginning of the podcast, I was like, oh, I have to get ready and say, hi, it's Dr. Laura Ellick. Welcome to From Mayhem to Mindset. It's just a part of me.
I love that. Okay, for folks that are going to watch this, how do they find out more about what you do? How do they contact you if they want to talk about getting some help? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Sure, you can go to my website at www.lauraellick.com. All of my videos, I think, are dropped on my YouTube, which is Laura Ellick, and you'll have all my contact information on the website. And I always tell people, even if I can't help you, I will always find someone who can.
Yeah. I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk. And I know we're going to hang out in
Yeah,
California too. And I'm enjoying
absolutely.
getting to spend more time with you and getting to know you. And I learned a lot about you today. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you
I'm
so much, Mark.
grateful.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And for the folks that are watching, if you want to learn more about what we do, mentalhealthaddictionlawfirm.com. That's mentallawfirm.com. And if you can't find the website, just Google my name. We have a YouTube channel, Astor Law, and there's about 1,200 videos on there, all about the work that we do. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you to Dr. Laura. And we're going to see you in the next episode.